Boom. We are live. I hope we're live. Anyway, you know what I'm like with this kind of stuff. Good to see some friendly faces in the chat. We've got Clive. We've got, well, let's see if I can bring him up. We've got Clive there. We've got Turing's Chest. Gleam. Gleam's got a tweet that's going to appear at some point in this stream. Lots and lots of familiar faces. So, yeah, really nice to see you all. Now, little bit of a backstory to this. I'm going to introduce Leo in a second, and he can tell you about his channel and stuff. But I think it's important that we establish what this discussion is about. Some of you may have seen things flying around on Twitter between myself and Leo. Not particularly proud of it, to be honest, but let's just give you a little bit of a backstory so you know how this discussion come to fruition. I posted a tweet. Let's have a look. A couple of days ago about Just Stop Oil. They had tweeted about a bus driver ramming into a load of passengers, and they seemed really upset that this bus driver had rammed, and that's the language that Just Stop Oil used in the tweet. A coach driver just rammed into a load of ordinary people going for a walk. And when I looked at the video, this is what the video looked like. So the bus was obviously crawling along, and I didn't feel that fit the description of a coach has rammed into a load of people. I felt it was quite dishonest. So I retweeted their tweet, and I basically called Just Stop Oil a load of dickheads, and that they were just pissing people off. Because that is my opinion, and we're all allowed on. That's my opinion. Leo, that you can see with us here. And again, interrupt me, Leo, if you feel I'm misrepresenting any of this. Leo quoted my tweet and said, oh, I've got... Hang on, let's okay. Quoted my tweet and seemed to feel that I was valuing traffic over the lives of humans. I disagreed. We had a little bit of a spat. Again, I'm not quite proud of that, but we did. And now we're here to discuss it civilly. So I'm going to bring Leo in just to see if that's a fair take on what happened. He can introduce himself, and then we'll just start having a chat. So, Leo, over to you, mate.
Yeah, I would say that was a pretty fair summary. I think that captures everything well. I'm also not proud of it either, so that makes two of us.
It happens on, the thing is, over Twitter as well, when you've got a limited number of characters, it is difficult to have a proper conversation in it.
Very.
And you know, things I certainly found out with that tweet I made anyway. It's a very divisive topic, but I'm just going to outline my stance, all right? And then just go ahead and tell me where I'm wrong. My stance is that although Just Stop Oil, the heart may be in the right place, nobody here is denying climate change. You know I'm a science teacher. You know I'm from my past history with other channels, you know I'm absolutely against science deniers, right? You know I hate that. So I'm fully on board with the problem of climate change and the need to do something about it. But my stance is that Just Stop Oil, and I know you're not from the UK, so you might not know the full backstory, Just Stop Oil are causing more harm than good. They're switching people off from the climate change cause. They're endangering people's lives, which we'll get to in the chat. And all in all, they are causing a horrible, needless mess that is indiscriminately hindering and harming members of the public, and it's not achieving their goal. So that is why I posted what I said. So, I mean, I'll let you start. Where am I wrong?
I don't think there's anything wrong with what you said. I have heard from a lot of people that Just Stop Oil really isn't doing very good things as an organization trying to promote climate change and doing something about it. And I have a lot of criticisms of organizations like Greenpeace and others that claim to be these organizations that are environmental and all this stuff, but that don't engage in the best practices. My comment was more, well, first off, I should apologize for painting you to be some like barbaric person that doesn't care about people. That was really, really flowery language. I probably shouldn't have done it that way. But the statement that I was making about protesting and how protests disrupt society and how there can be some negative effects of that was much more broad, not really focused on any one particular group. I can grant that Just Stop Oil is just harmful more than anything, but I think that the idea that protests are meant to be disruptive is something that very often gets overlooked in these discussions about protests. And when we see protests happening, I find that a lot of people, and I'm not saying this about you, I live here in the United States, so a lot of people, particularly on the right, will use a small amount of negative side effects, negative sort of spandrel effects of these protests to argue that protesting is wrong, that it shouldn't be allowed. And we saw this, I don't know how much you would know about it. I'm sure you heard about it, but with the George Floyd protests in 2020, there was rioting and stuff like that happened in a number of cities. The whole of the protests were actually analyzed by experts, and they estimate, I think, that 4 to 6% of all of the organized protests that happened had some form of violence in them. And that, as is actually somewhat of a tradition in the United States, particularly with racial protests, law enforcement oftentimes will instigate them. So I bring this up to show that a small amount of harm often being done, I would say usually inevitably, from a disruption in society by a group of people meant to draw attention to some grievance or something like that, a protest, I don't think necessarily is an argument against the notion of protests or against the notion that protests are to be disruptive. I'll leave it there.
And of course, a protest or a strike or anything like that, the whole idea is that it is going to be disruptive. But to achieve your goal, I think you'll agree, I hope we'll see, is that protests should bring the public on board with them. So yes, you might have some kind of disruption, but you're building support from, would you agree with that? That's the idea.
Oh, yeah, I think that the purpose of a protest is also to build support.
So let me just give you some context behind the tweet that I posted out. Because again, I know you don't live in the UK, so these are things that you just might be completely unaware of. All right, which I expect you to be aware. So I just, hopefully, if I show you some of these things, you might see what I said in a fresh light. Okay. Mm-hmm. Here is something that happened very recently. I'm going to play you a clip now of a lady who has a baby in the car, and she's trying to get to hospital with the baby in the car. And then I just want you to think, if you were that woman, what would you do in that situation? Just chat about it. So here we go. And I'll stop it there because that horn is driving me nuts. But basically, just carry on walking and they don't move. So she's told him she's got the baby in the car. It's not made any difference. If you were that woman, what would you have done?
Well, me personally, I would have gotten out like she did and respectfully asked them to move. And that, I respect what they're doing and I agree with their message, but that I do need to get through for a legitimate emergency. And I think that on their part, the respectful thing to do would be to allow me through. And if not, then I'm going to slowly push my way through, non-violently, because I have an emergency here.
And I'm glad you said that, because I know that the bus wasn't perhaps necessarily an emergency, but that's all the coach was doing in the tweet. Certainly I retweeted, was just very slowly and gently nudging people out the way. But my problem with things like this is that lady there with the baby in the car happened to be at the front of the queue. But these protests, this slow marching, builds up an awful big backlog of traffic. She could have easily been half a mile behind, having to sprint to the front. She could have been completely gridlocked half a mile back, and they wouldn't have known, and I think when you take that kind of action, we're going to deliberately slow down traffic. You get these backlogs, and things like this are almost inevitable. I'll just show you something else, if I can just remember where it was. Let's have a look. Here we go. Now, I'm not a big fan of GB News. I was going to say that, but when I punched stuff into YouTube today, GB News. Do you know GB News, Leo?
I've heard of them, but I don't really know much about them.
Yeah, they do get some dubious guests on, but this is a video where they get a Just Stop Oil spokesman on. I'll just show you the video.
Okay, what happened then, mate? Because we saw ambulances and the fire service there being blocked from getting through.
Well, I do wish you'd run the whole clip there, Patrick, because actually if you'd run the whole thing, you'd see that the fire engine gets through, our people get straight out of the way, and in fact it was one of our people that advised that ambulance the shortest way to go around to avoid any traffic.
So we do have clips here which do show some ambulances and some fire trucks getting through, but I mean, you have to acknowledge there, though, that that's a massive inconvenience for people, and it does appear to show that. Look at the ambulance, it's got its blue lights on, there could be someone in the back having a heart attack, and there's a load of numpties in orange there blocking his way.
Right, just to get everyone up to speed of what we're asking for, Just Stop Oil are asking for, we're demanding that there's no new licensing and consent. No new licensing.
And you'll see there's a pattern with that. Whenever they're pointing out that actually you're doing some harm, every time one of them speaks, they'll not address that. They'll immediately go on script and just say, well, actually, let's talk about the climate change. And the reason that ambulance couldn't get through was because they glued themselves to the ground. You know, and it just seems to me he was saying, well, it's all right. We told them a different route to the hospital. I don't know, what's your take on that? Like, what do you think?
Well, for me, I mean, if there was legitimately a shorter way to wherever they needed to go, I would assume they'd probably be taking that. I don't know if that would be what would be blocked or not, but I'm of the opinion that given the amount of protesting that happens that blocks traffic all across the world and that has throughout history, particularly in the southern United States in the 50s and the 60s, that these events tend not to happen as frequently as people think and are often utilized again as a means of, I would say, downplaying the importance of the disruption of protests.
And you know, I get what you're saying. That if something was a one-off and it had happened, and then you realize post-event, you know, that's caused some real harm. It doesn't make it any better, but you can have a certain bit more understanding from it. But what Just Stop Oil are doing over here is this isn't a one-off event. This is constant. This is almost on a daily basis. Multiple times within the same city, bringing cities to gridlock. A deliberate attempt to lock a city down over and over. And this isn't the first time that they've caused emergency vehicles to stop. Let me see if I can just find this for you. Let's just have a look where it is. If I can get it just right. Is it this one? It might not be. Let's have a look. Okay, that's not that. I have got a note of, let me just have a look here. There we go. So, okay, number 6. I've got so many things lined up here. Okay, so this is a headline from last year when they blocked a road deliberately, and a lady was on her way to hospital. She'd had a stroke, and because she was blocked, instead of getting to hospital on time, she was left in there for 6 hours. 6 hours. And because of that, she's now permanently paralyzed. And this was last year. This is, again, just one of many, many incidents. But yet they're repeating the same behavior. So they know the harm that they're causing, but they're still coming and locking cities down rather than, you know, choosing other ways to protest or choosing other ways to always protest, and they do some of the daft stuff. But I mean, to me, I don't know, do we differ on this point? To me, the point of locking a city down so emergency vehicles and people that need help are not getting to where they need to be, to me, that is immoral. They need locking up, and I can't stomach it. Do we disagree on that bit?
Well, on the second part, yeah. On the fact that they shouldn't be doing it, no, we don't disagree. That they should be thrown in jail for it, I don't know if I agree with that.
How would you deter them then?
I would solve the problem that they're protesting, or work my best to do so. That's what I would do personally.
So, are you saying that you would be you kind of happy for these protests to carry on, these people still to be not getting to hospital on time, and these things to be happening, as long as it promotes the government into taking action? Is that your kind of stance?
Well, I think that climate change protests broadly are a good thing, even though there are particular instances in which harm is done. as there is with literally any instance of broad protest, like in the southern United States in the 50s and 60s. There was harm done to society broadly and its daily operation as a result of these protests. And what happened is cities eventually did begin to address these grievances and made the relevant changes. But it doesn't seem like governments today want to do that. And it's interesting because what do we do when ambulances can't get to hospitals because the roads are flooded out, or because of wildfires, or because of mass destruction because of tornadoes and hurricanes, or because they're being blocked by tens of thousands of immigrants fleeing their countries as their homes flood? What then?
Well, that's certainly not done by choice. I think deliberately today going out to cities and on a almost daily basis causing this problem. That is our problem now. That yes, we all understand that there's a need for action when it comes to climate change. I don't see in any way, shape, or form how what they are doing is promoting change. They are not getting people on side with what they're doing. They are causing people, to a great deal of stress to people. They're causing possible. It's not going to be long before somebody dies if this carries on. Somebody in an ambulance or somebody in a car dies because he can't get where they need to be. Is that a price worth paying? Because it's not for me. Are you happy with that being what's almost an inevitability?
No, not by choice. I'm not. No. But I mean,
So,
if it happens because grievances aren't being addressed, I mean, I only imagine the hundreds of millions of humans that will die as we do nothing to address climate change.
I mean, I've got grievances about certain things. Does that give me the right, though, if my grievances aren't being heard, or a certain political group wants changes to the law, or certain laws? Does that give them a right to block the streets and people? Is it a right that they have?
I would say in my country it is, because you have the right to peaceably protest and assemble, and that includes in streets. So, because streets are technically public in this country, and I think blocking traffic is peaceful. That is not a violent thing to do. It might be an inconvenience, and it might be a disruption, but I don't think it's violent.
It's not violent, but do you accept that it can and probably will lead to somebody dying?
Potentially, yeah.
And even with that stance, you still support them doing that?
No, not in that instance. I don't support that. But the problem is, what I see happening is more an inevitability of the fact that human society is being extremely stressed by problems that unfortunately the vast majority of humans do not individually have the power to solve, which is why they organize, protest, and disrupt to force the systems with the power to make these changes, I may not like a lot of the ways that some of these people go about doing this. I don't really myself have much control over that. But the more that we don't solve these problems, the more that we ignore what's happening, the worse this will get. And yes, it will lead to people dying. Do I want this to happen? No. Do I support some of these methods? No. But unfortunately, I see them as an inevitability of us not addressing the problems we need to be addressing as a species.
Well, I think we both agree it's inevitable somebody's going to die, and we both agree that the issues need tackling. I think, for me, though, there are far, far more effective methods of getting people on side. And I think you do need to get people on side if you're going to build a movement. And again, if we look at the UK, just let me show you this. I'm not the only person that feels like this. They aren't getting people on side. I went this morning to the YouTube channel of Just Stop Oil, and I recorded the comments on the latest video, or it was the latest video by this morning. If they've released another video today, fair enough. But I haven't done anything funny with these comments. I've not filtered them. I've not done anything with them. Go and have a look yourself. But have a read of this and tell me if you think that they're actually getting people on board. Now that video's got another minute to play on it, with the, but I didn't want to bore everyone just by playing constant comments. So you can go to their Twitter, you can go to articles online where people comment underneath. You can go to their own YouTube channel. And in the UK, like I say, I know you're not from here, but in the UK, everybody hates them. Everybody. Bar obviously a very small minority. And certainly in my experience, people I know, they don't want to be associated with Just Stop Oil. I believe that climate change is a problem. Things need to be done about it. But I don't want to be associated with them. I don't want to talk about climate change and the problem for fear of being associated with them. So they're not bringing people with them. They're turning everybody against them and risking like literal death by holding up ambulances in traffic. You know, the whole point of my tweet that I pointed out was that they are pissing everybody off. They do act like dickheads. Surely there's a better way. Do you not think that finding alternate ways of protesting would be more effective for them?
Well, I mean, me personally, protests would only be a very small part of how I would organize a movement that would be more about like actually educating the public as to the dangers that our society faces if we don't solve this problem, and actually ensuring that people know about what the issue is and what happens if we don't solve it, and informing them of the ways in which they can contribute to helping the problem, primarily through voting for the right politicians, the right political parties, and demanding of their politicians that they make the right kinds of choices to fix these problems. That we should be in favor of nuclear instead of being scared of it because we don't understand anything about physics or something like that. That's what I would be doing. I don't know. When it comes to like advocacy and activism, protest is something I've always supported, but for me, I've always valued more community organization, if you know what I mean. But I can't say that I support specifically Just Stop Oil, but again, this is only one instance of a much, much, much broader movement that's going on here with respect to addressing the issue of climate change. And so I can agree that Just Stop Oil isn't very well liked. Their tactics aren't very good, but I'm wondering how that bears on the broader climate movement that we're seeing globally.
And well, I don't think it helps. I don't think it helps at all. I think what it does is it turns people off completely. You know, Clive Wells in the chat made a brilliant point earlier on that he just simply won't. I'm kind of paraphrasing him here. I can't remember his exact words, but he just simply won't support organizations that behave in that way. And actually, I did have a look at some. Have a look at my images here to see if I could find any scientific articles on this kind of stuff, and like research onto what causes people to support a movement, support a protest. And I found this one. There's a heading. You can Google it yourself on ResearchGate, and it's actually free to read. And really, this is a conclusion at the end. They looked at six different completely like different movements, all completely unrelated. And basically they found out that essentially if you are blocking traffic is there as one of them, vandalism, you know, these kinds of behaviors are more likely just to switch people off completely from supporting a protest. And I did find a couple of other scientific articles as well that drew the same conclusion in the abstract, but they seem to be behind a paywall, and I didn't want to access the full paper. I've not found one bit of evidence that suggests if a movement is annoying people as much as they are annoying people, that they are successful in what they're doing. So I suggest, you know, a massive change of strategy for them that doesn't risk people's lives, you know, and that's the thing that bugs me. I mean, I want to get back to that, like this whole marching slowly down a street and cutting traffic off so emergency vehicles can't go anywhere. Just what is your thought on that? Do you support them doing that?
In principle, yes.
Even though you know it might lead to somebody dying?
Yeah, in principle, yes.
I mean, obviously it's all subjective and opinion based. Do you believe that most people have that opinion?
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
I mean, I'll ask the chat. There's not many.
I would suppose probably not, because I don't think most people understand anything about what protest is and how it's supposed to play out.
Is it supposed to put people's lives at risk and alienate people? Or is it
well,
supposed to get people on board?
Sometimes potentially, yes. We've seen that historically. I mean, the American Revolution was one giant protest against the English crown. People died. A lot of people died, in fact, because sometimes protests become revolutions, become wars. We can see this consistently throughout human history. Is it good? No, but unfortunately, it is the way that human society develops. It is inevitable. That's the point that I'm making, is that whether we like it or not, humans are going to go out, they're going to block streets, they're going to be disruptive, particularly when they're consistently stressed by problems they do not have the ability to solve. I really don't know what else I can say about that other than this isn't about whether, oh, God, this is bad or this is good. It's about, well, humans surviving, really, is what it's about. You stress humans enough, they're going to fight back in a variety of different ways. And we're seeing that play out now in the United States, in Canada, in the United Kingdom, in other countries across Europe, that this is what we're seeing over a variety of different issues.
So you are right. It is about saving lives. And that is what my tweet originally was about. It's about them not blocking traffic, them not stopping ambulances getting to hospital, them not stopping people getting to medical appointments, and finding a different way to do it. Because right now, more people are dying and getting seriously hurt as a result of, protests like this than they are from climate change. That's maybe they are causing the problem. And the thing is, like, I know you mentioned before, kind of like the revolution and the war, and obviously in something like that, you've got factions of people who are choosing to come together and fight for their cause, and people die. I don't think that lady we saw before, who had the baby in the car that needed to get to hospital, was choosing to be confrontational with anybody. But I just want to mention what you said about that, because you did say that had that been you would have just got in your car and you would have driven through them anyway. I know you didn't say ram them over or anything like that, but you would have driven through them anyway. But if you weren't in that position, you were stuck right at the back of the queue, and your baby was ill, you needed to get to hospital, how would you have felt?
I have no idea.
I mean, I'm a dad. I've got 2 kids, and depending on which one it was, I could have been really upset. It's a joke. It's heartbreaking. I've only said that because I know one of them's watching. I don't know. I think this is something that divides. But I'm going to ask the chat. Like, can you just give us a bit of a vote? Can you just put yes if you support them blocking the traffic, and no if you don't?
You should be able to put up a poll in your chat. I don't know how to do it because I've never done it. But I don't know if you have to do it through YouTube. Yeah.
I don't know if I can do it straight from StreamYard. I might have to pop up the thing, but there's not too many of us watching. So let me see what else I can show you. Yeah, so let's have a look. While they're doing that, Gleam made a brilliant point on Twitter before, and he said this. So, like, is any protest valid which causes the very thing you're attempting to prevent? So essentially, Just Stop Oil, who were trying to prevent the burning of oil-based products and reduce pollution by blocking the cities and having people sat for hours in long traffic jams, are inevitably causing more pollution anyway. It's completely counterproductive. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think it's quite hypocritical of them.
Well, I would be curious to actually see the numbers on whether it's more pollution or not when cars are idling rather than actually driving down the road under power. But I also think it's entirely meaningless. It doesn't matter, because that's not where a person sitting in their car at a stoplight isn't really where, like, the majority of pollution comes from. 71% of total global greenhouse gas emissions come from the operations of the largest 100 corporations. And this is why, and I'm not saying that you were doing this, I'm just sort of adding this on as an addendum. This is why I get upset when people trying to make it out to be like us as individuals need to change what we do to address the climate, rather than that it's the broad systems under which we live need to be changed with respect to how they operate. So I don't really know. Even if there is a little bit more pollution being given off, I think at the end of the day, it's meaningless. It's a less than 1% increase. It doesn't matter. So I would question the level to which pro climate change protests are furthering climate change. I would just need to see research on that.
Okay, so how much they're actually going to affect, and that's a really good point. So let's have a look at this. This is everything I've got has been taken from your World in Data or Statistica. This was compiled in 2019 by the Union of Concerned Scientists, who are obviously very concerned about climate change. It's even in the name, concerned scientists. And it's the output in 2019 of carbon dioxide in the earth, globally. And if you look at the United Kingdom, right up there at the top, we're about 1%. So Just Stop Oil, who are risking people's lives by blocking our streets, if they achieve their goal tomorrow, which clearly they won't, people are not going to stop heating their homes or driving their cars. But if they were to achieve their goal tomorrow and no fossil fuel was burned in this country whatsoever, like you said before, you pulled out that figure, 1%, doesn't really matter. Well, this is the 1%. We literally produce 1% of the world's carbon dioxide. So it wouldn't matter. It just wouldn't matter what if they achieve their goal in the UK tomorrow, it would make no difference whatsoever. But yet they're putting people's lives at risk for it.
So what I would say is I think it doesn't matter if we're looking just at specifically the amount of CO2 that the country emits and nothing else. I think the reason why these protests are happening more in places like the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, Canada, Sweden, is because these are democracies. Imagine if you tried to protest in China. What's going to happen? The only way that that's going to work is if it's literally hundreds of thousands of people. Imagine like if they tried to protest in Modi's India. It's probably, I mean, it already doesn't really always play out the best, even in the United States. That's because the United States isn't really a democracy, but that's a different discussion. But that's why protests tend to happen more in the Western world, is because they're, let me put it this way, more democratic than other countries that are not in the Western world. One. Two, I think that if the United Kingdom over the next 10 years dedicated to reduce their CO2 emissions by 90% because of the hegemonic power they have as a state globally, that could do a hell of a lot to influence a lot of other countries to make similar changes, particularly within Europe. So this is the thing that we have to think about when it comes to countries and the changes that they make. Like the United States was only 16%. That's actually really not that much. That's less than a fifth of total global greenhouse gas emissions. But think of the power on the global stage that the U.S. has. If it made a plan and committed to over 10 years reducing CO2 emissions by 90%, how many other countries would likely see that and be like, oh, what the United States of America is making the shine? Canada would probably do something similar. Many countries in Europe would probably do something similar. You might see Southern American countries make their attempts at committing to something like this because such a powerful nation is making these changes. We've seen this. We've seen this for over hundreds of years, where the most powerful nations at the time make certain changes, start doing certain things differently, and it catches on with the rest of the world.
So, I mean, if we look at the UK's oil consumption, then over the last 20 years, we are seeing a decline. Obviously, right, that second bar from the right was in the COVID year. This doesn't come quite up to current year, but we are decreasing. We are seeing a good trend of decreasing oil use over time. For the UK, and you mentioned Europe as well. And if we look at CO2 emissions, we can see that the European emissions are now on a decline. But look at China. The CO2 emissions from China are absolutely rocketing. So I know you said before, people aren't going to go over there and perform these kind of demonstrations because they are going to get locked up, they are going to get beaten, etc. But that's where the problem is, and developing. We look at India as well, and this is that right now they are slightly below Europe, but we can see that the trend that we're on, and we can see in 10 years, the problem isn't going to be Europe whatsoever. It's, even America has kind of flattened out and is on the way down. So these things that you mentioned are happening. America, Europe are making efforts to reduce. However, it's other countries where the problem is rising. So, I mean, I don't know. We seem to be doing that.
Well, I would say that there's been reductions. I wouldn't say that most of the reductions we see are at least not even largely due to deliberate attempts to reduce them. I think they're just the result of the slight technological development we happen to see in society. I don't think most Western nations are making a serious attempt to actually address this problem. And I think that's because they're, unfortunately, I'm going to have to bring some political economy to this because it does factor into the problem. That's because the corporations that operate the systems that dump all the CO2 and methane into our atmosphere dump millions upon millions, if not billions of dollars into governments all across the Western world to not make the changes. We know this. This is a fact. The oil industry globally has consistently lobbied against addressing climate change. This is a fact. They have literally falsified data with respect to the damage that they're doing. This is a fact. Why are they doing that? Because they care more about making their money than they do about addressing the problems they're perpetuating on the rest of the world. So the reason that we're seeing the increases in China is largely because most global manufacturing today occurs in China. And who owns most of those factories? Well, China technically owns them. But who's operating these factories? Largely American corporations, maybe some European ones, but it's largely American corporations. Again, 71% of total global greenhouse gas emissions are the result of the operations of the largest 100 corporations. Which countries do they tend to operate in? China, India, Pakistan, places like that. And that's why those places we're not seeing, excuse me, we're not seeing the reductions that we need to see. Are countries making some attempts to reduce? Are they committing to plans I would largely call neoliberal plans that don't like really meaningfully address the problem? Sure, yeah. But I don't think anybody who really follows the climate change and the climate movement is going to say that anywhere in the world is there meaningful, intentional, deliberate attempts to seriously address this problem, which is exactly what we need. And it's just not happening.
So, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said there, you know, especially about the oil companies and stuff. You know, we're not, I mean, let's say, you know, I'm not a science denier. I'm not, you know, I'm not denying climate change in any way, shape or form.
Yeah.
What you've highlighted in what you've said is essentially the problem is massive, right? The problem is massive, and it's based with companies that don't want to change because they're making money, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So, I mean, I've got to go back. How does taking a lady in, you know, a borough of London and stopping her getting a baby to the hospital on time, how does that help in any way?
Oh, it doesn't.
Isn't it
Not
just
at all.
meaningless?
Not even remotely. And that's the problem. Just Stop Oil seems to be just a bad instance of addressing climate change. But I'm not opposed. And this is why I said, when you asked me if I'm in favor of, you know, protesters blocking traffic, potentially leading to somebody's death, and I answered in principle, yes. Because what I mean by that is, do I agree with the concept of protest extending to like blocking traffic? Yes. Does that mean that I want or desire for people to die because of that? No. Do I recognize that that will be an inevitable feature of protests, which are themselves an inevitable result of humans being socially stressed and not their grievances not being addressed? Yes, a lot of this is bad, but unfortunately it's inevitable. This is what happens. What we're seeing is what happens when you don't address these problems. They will continue to put stress on the lower classes. The lower classes will continue to desperately look for attempts to try to draw attention to this, and that may potentially result in people's death. This is just what happens when you do this to humans. If we want this to stop, then we need to address the problems. And I don't care if you don't like Just Stop Oil, everyone should be very loud about this.
Well, I think you're right that there is an inevitability, but the inevitability is either, you know, and I hate saying it, within the next few weeks, either a Just Stop Oil protester or more than one is going to be plowed into by a car and run over and killed, or somebody's going to die in the back of an ambulance because he can't get to hospital. Given that choice, you know, if it had to be a choice, then I hope it's a Just Stop Oil protester and not the innocent person in the back of the ambulance. I can't get on board. Like, I get on board with the right to protest, but I can't get on board with an organization performing an action that they know is more than likely to lead to somebody dying in the back of an ambulance. They know when they take to the street and they stand out and they bring a city like London to absolute gridlock, they know that that is a real significant a significant risk. They know that. And yet they're taking it upon themselves to have the right to put other people's lives at risk. And it's not about the cause that they're fighting for. They could find so many different ways to protest, and nobody would have this hateful reaction towards them. But they are deliberately choosing just to make their own point, to put other people's lives at risk. And that is what I can't get on board with.
So I'm a little curious. Do you have at least one or two examples of forms of protest that are equally disruptive but do not result in people's death?
Equally disruptive? When you say equally, in terms of what? You're talking about holding up...
In terms of like social disruption. So there's a level of disruption in society by like blocking shit piles of traffic and making it so like a city can't operate properly. But you could disrupt a society at equal levels through other means. Blocking off food, water, electricity. There's a variety of things you could do. What would be a way to protest that is equally disruptive but does not result in people's death?
I'll tell you one that would be equally as how can I put it, widespread in terms of the attention it got, and that would be blocking off sporting events. So disrupting sporting events.
Which I do also agree with. Yes.
Now they do have a history of doing that. So they started off. Actually, they started off as an Extinction Rebellion, pouring shit over the statue of Captain Tom, who was a dear old man who died. You won't have heard of him in America, but he just poured human shit over his statue. And he had nothing to do with oil or anything. He was a 100-year-old guy that raised a load of money for charity during COVID. Well, they poured shit over his statue. But anyway, then they moved on to going into football grounds and tying themselves to the goalposts and disrupting the matches, and that got them a lot of publicity. Mm-hmm. But yet nobody's life was at risk. And it would have pissed me off if I was somebody who'd bought a ticket and I had to go to the match, and I'd spent my hard-earned money in a cost of living crisis, and the match was disrupted because I'd done that. That I would have found that hugely disruptive. But nobody's going to die. Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to die. That would be one example.
Awesome. By the way, I wasn't asking that question to try to like catch you up. I was legitimately interested in how you might look at that. Because one way that I would say is that you get a couple hundred people that literally just walk into the legislative chamber with their posters screaming about fix this fucking problem now, which has happened more so at the state level. Good luck at the federal level. Within the United States, where there's been dozens or maybe a couple hundred people that gather at, where the legislative chamber is. Some of them will go in, they'll be loud, they'll disrupt sessions. That is another thing that people should do. Something that has happened, I think it was in like Japan or somewhere over in the Asia, Southeast Asia area, where something happened with the busing companies. And with like them and their unions, they didn't come to a deal, and they were trying to reduce pay. So all the bus drivers went out and they still drove their buses and everything, but they accepted no fares. So that they kept things going, but they were hurting the company at the same time, which was the intent. So there are other ways that they could go about it, and this is where I would say Just Stop Oil is probably led by a lot of young, naive people who don't understand anything about meaningful social organization and things like that, which I tend to see in organizations like them, where it's like, yeah, the message you're fighting for is good, but you aren't doing anything really to like help, if you know what I mean. Yeah, I guess that I'll just leave it there.
Well, what I'm going to do, because I said I won't keep you for more than an hour, I want to ask you one more question, but then to anyone in the chat, are you happy to take questions from the chat? If anyone's got anything that we can tag you in. Okay.
And there's a couple of comments in there I'd like to respond to, because I think they kind of missed the point that I'm making, but also demonstrate another point that I made, that I don't really think there's a lot of people that understand the nature of a protest or the purpose of it. But yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Well, we'll do that while people are tagging you in. I just want to ask you, because like the original spat came about, I felt maybe you misunderstood my point a little bit.
Yeah,
so
I
did.
did.
Bring the original retweet. Just see if we're still like, hopefully having heard what I've said today about why I hate them, and because it is that they are putting people's lives at risk. Do you still hold the view that I value traffic over the lives of humans?
No, I don't think I ever did. I think I was just being like really, really edgy with that. If you know what I mean when I say edgy with that tweet. Because like the thing is on Twitter, you said this in the beginning, you're limited to characters, and so everybody just tends to be blunt and direct about everything all the time. And I feel that a lot of people also tend to be much more dismissive on Twitter than even on like Facebook or other internet apps. And again, I think a lot of it has to do with the character limit. That's why I think it should just be a flat 500 characters for everyone.
Well, I think I've come to understand your point a little bit more. I think we obviously disagree. We agree on a lot of things, but I think we obviously disagree on the main bit of, in principle, I do not think it's fine to them to back up traffic in the way they're doing. You do, but it's an opinion. That's your opinion. I've got mine. You know, got to live with the fact we've got different opinions. That's it.
And just to clarify, Katz is a great man. So,
oh, thank you, Leo. So are you. Right. Let's get people from the chat asking questions. You said you saw a couple. Maybe I can bring them up on screen if you tell me who they were from.
One of them was from Darren Gordon Hill. It's up just a little ways. I think I passed it. Maybe I did pass it. Hold on. Yeah. What I was going to say about that is I don't really see much of a difference. I would say that disruptive and gain attention for your cause can be synonymous. I don't necessarily think that's the case with Just Stop Oil. But I think that being disruptive in, like with what Cass was talking about, disrupting the sports events does gain attention for your cause. So I think that's the point of a protest, is to disrupt to whatever level the organizers see fit. Sometimes it's harmful, sometimes it's not, in an attempt to show people, hey, we're here, this is an issue, people should know about it, and we should be talking about it. That is the point of a protest. Now, I can't speak for other nations because I don't know about their founding documents, but here in the United States of America, we have that right. We have that right to peaceably assemble on public property. And in the United States of America, well, roads are public property. So if they might not be in the United Kingdom, I genuinely don't know. But here, yeah, you can block roads in a protest because you as a society own those roads. And that's one of the things that I think is a rather deeply underlying point contained in the notion of protests and blocking roads with protests, is it's actually taking command as a society and as a member of society. We own these roads, and if you won't listen to our problems, we'll just block them because we fucking own these motherfuckers. And that's how it is. I wish people had more of a mentality like that, not necessarily with blocking traffic, but that collectively we own and run our societies, not the politicians, not the capitalists, us. And it's up to us to recognize that we're all in the same boat, we're all at the same level, and there's a different group of people who are not, who tend to keep most of the control over society. And it won't be until we can band together, come together, and actually stand up against what's happening that any meaningful change is going to be made.
Well, I'm not to just bring up the point you made about the law. I'm not an expert on the law in the UK by any stretch. I am aware from the little bits of research I've done on it. We have something called Section 12, which doesn't necessarily say you're not allowed to go on the streets and block the traffic, but it does say that, you know, protests shouldn't. I can't remember the exact words, but it kind of implies it shouldn't be harmful or dangerous to anybody, which it is if you're blocking emergency vehicles. And interestingly enough, when it was the King's coronation and people were out blocking the streets,
I'm still here.
The police seemed to arrest them and clear the streets quite effectively. But I don't know if you can see what's on the screen there. We've got another one from High Inquisitor. Can you see that, or do you want me to read it out?
Yeah, I can see it. Is the point supposed to be that people in Just Stop Oil use cars? Of course they do. That's a part of society. That's how we get around in society. I've never understood this objection that, oh, well, you take part in a society that you ultimately have no control over how it's structured, and so you have to partake in it in certain ways. Well, why do you choose to do that? It's like looking at somebody and saying, you know what? Everything you've ever done in your life is just consistent with the laws of physics. Now, why? Is everything that you do just consistent with the laws of physics? Well, gee, I fucking wonder.
Another one here from Gleam. They all seem to be for you. If you want to ask me any, tag me in. But if not, I'm just going to assume they're all for Leo. Another one for you.
Can you explain why the military? That's probably because the military are just Well, they're war machines, Gleam. Of course, they use most of the oil. I think it's not the sole target because I just don't think there's a lot of people. See, this is the thing. I think that when we look at the world, even though I probably disagree with most of the people in it, I think everybody's hearts are, well, the vast majority of us, our hearts are in the right place. Like we want societies to be better. We want people to be happy. We want to be able to live meaningful lives. But I also think that the average person is pretty, I'm not going to use the word ignorant, naive to how society broadly is really structured. And I just don't think that most people understand that the military consumes massive amounts of fossil fuels, and that's why they don't target them. I also think that the military being, well, a military, particularly if it's the military of an authoritarian nation like the United States, targeting it is probably not the smartest thing to do. That's probably not what I would do or recommend, but yeah.
Okay, sorry, I was just looking for other questions for you there. Yeah, can you tag, just put either at Leo or at Katz if you've got a question, because I'm just trying to scan through, and I actually think, unless somebody's written a question and not tagged, I think we are actually out of questions here.
Can I just make a point, piggybacking off of what Planar Walk said a couple times, actually? So they said that, let's make roads for people, not cars. And I agree with that completely. I also think that one of the solutions to this problem, and mainly because it's a solution to climate change, is get rid of private ownership of cars, or personal ownership of cars. Why do we do this? Why do we have this? People don't know. We don't need that. You can fit 50 fucking people on a bus. I know it's probably more than that in the United Kingdom because you all have like 5-story buses. It's insane. But how do you balance those things? Anyway, that's off topic. But yeah, let's pedestrianize our cities. Why the fuck is there not a high-speed magnetic levitation rail system from London to Edinburgh? You could get there in like 2.5 hours instead of like 6 or whatever it is, 5 or 6 or something like that. Why? How? If I was prime minister of that country, oh my God, it's so small. It would be so cheap, yet so efficient. Why are we not doing it? See, this is what I'm talking about. Like high-speed rail, robust public transportation, pedestrianization of cities, nuclear power, solar power. What the fuck are we sitting around doing? We're just standing here with our dicks in our hands, not doing anything to fix any of the problems that are just rolling our way, going to crush us when they get here.
Okay, cool. Question for me: do I think they are sincere or some of them professional eco-activists? Yeah, some of them on a salary. You know what? Somebody's bankrolling them, aren't they? Somebody's bankrolling them. It wouldn't be surprising.
It wouldn't surprising.
Yeah, it wouldn't be surprising at all. I'm just going to say we've got Mr. Jones 1972. He's waiting in the back room at the minute. I know you can't see him. I said I won't keep you for more than an hour, and I was also going to roll on to an after show with 2 other people. So what I'm going to do, we don't seem to have any more questions, but I'm not going to kick you off the stream, but I'm going to kick you off the stream rather than start a new one as like an after show thing. Because I know you want to upload this to your channel, and I think we've got a nice concise 55 minutes there, and I think we've put the spat to bed, which is nice, and it's been good to at least hear
clarify each other's points.
Yeah, I think that's been great. So I'm going to swap you out if that's okay, Leo. Don't feel you're being kicked out or anything. But listen, thanks. And if you ever want to chat about anything like this again, just hit me up in DMs.
Sure thing. I do have one question that I wanted to ask you. Do you still have the debate channel or not?
I gave it away to Crafty and Tatty. They own it now. I've not spoken to them for quite some time, so I'm not sure what they're doing with it. But I don't own it. They own it now.
Okay. I was just curious if that was still up and running or not.
Yeah, I don't think they've been busy with it. I'm not spoken to either of them for about a year, but I know that they were planning to bring it back. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Anyway,
right. Well,
thank you much for hearing me out and having me on. It was really appreciated.
No, it was good. It's good to chat.
Subscribe.
First.